Hello, Partnering for Vaccine Equity learning community members and others working to advance vaccine equity. I'm Luis Gallardo, a member of the Learning Communities Group Learning Team, and on behalf of our team at the Urban Institute and our partners at the CDC, thanks for being with us this afternoon. The National Resource Center for Refugees, Immigrants, and Migrants, otherwise known as NRC RIM, is funded by the CDC to support health departments and community organizations working with refugee, immigrant, and migrant communities that have been disproportionately affected by health inequities. It's hard to come by high-quality resources that are rigorously translated, culturally relevant, and professionally designed, but NRC RIM has filled that gap. Today's session focuses on using NRC RIM's templates to create health education campaigns or create your own campaign in partnership with your local community. During the webinar, Sarita will review material creation, share translation strategies that ensure materials are linguistically and culturally relevant, and demonstrate how to customize professionally designed and pre-translated NRC RIM health campaign materials. Next slide. Before we go any further, I'll review a few quick points about how this session will work. First, we do offer live interpretation from English to Spanish during our events. If you would like to listen to the Spanish language channel, simply click on the globe icon in the Zoom taskbar at the bottom of your screen. You've all been muted upon entry to this session. If you have any questions for our speakers during the presentation, we ask that you please use the Q&A tool in your Zoom taskbar to submit it. We'll also have dedicated time for questions and answers at the end, where you can ask your questions live. Just use the raise hand feature at the time and we'll take you off mute so you can speak. The chat room feature is also open today, and we encourage you to use it to introduce yourself or comment on what you've been hearing. However, please try not to put your questions for the speakers and the panelists in the chat because we might miss them. Submit them via the Q&A instead. If you have any technical difficulties at any point during the session, please send an email to our community manager's inbox, vaxequitylearning@urban.org, so that we can assist you with troubleshooting. And as with all of our learning events, we will post the slides and a recording of this event on our community website and circulate them through the digests that go out through the CDC-managed Adult Vax Program listserv, which all PAVE members should be a part of. And finally, just a heads up, as we approach the end of our session and transition into the Q&A portion, we'll be launching a very brief poll of your satisfaction with this learning event. We really do appreciate your feedback and hope that you'll participate in the poll when it pops up. Next slide. It is now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker for today. Sarita Wilkins is a communications strategist for NRC RIM, where she manages the communications efforts for the center and leads the creation and dissemination of health communications materials. She has more than a decade of experience in strategic communications, specializing in internal communications, digital media, and diverse and multilingual communities. Before joining the team at NRC RIM, she led communications for K-12 public schools. Sarita is currently pursuing a master's in public health at the University of Minnesota, where she hopes to focus on immigrant and refugee children's health. She holds a master's degree in linguistics from New York University, where she explored socioeconomic influences on Spanish-speaking immigrant speech patterns, and she holds a bachelor's degree from Macalester College. Thanks for joining us today, Sarita. The floor is yours. And we'll stop sharing our screen and transition over to you.
Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. Let me just share my screen here. Thank you for having me. Before I get started with the culturally and linguistically relevant health communications, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about us. As Louise mentioned, we are funded by the CDC and housed at the University of Minnesota. And while we were initially established as part of the nation's COVID-19 response, we now support health departments and community organizations working with refugee, immigrant, and migrant communities that have been disproportionately impacted by health inequities of all kinds, not just COVID-19. And we do that by strengthening partnerships between health departments and communities and supporting organizations that work directly with refugees, immigrants, and migrants with the ultimate goal of improving health equity. We support organizations by collecting and disseminating best practices, health communications, and health education, and by offering online training such as this. We also offer technical assistance and a few other services. Now, because we work with health departments and CBOs, we're one step removed from the community, and we rely on our core partners to keep us informed of the challenges and successes of both workers and the communities that they serve. This is our fourth year, and we're wrapping up our COVID-19 work so we can focus on the public health needs of new arrival communities more broadly. Specifically, we're expanding our efforts to include public health initiatives that may be needed in Afghan communities, not just with COVID-19. And we're also charged with communicating the health requirements for Ukrainians who arrive through the United for Ukraine program. So today I'm going to talk to you about creating tailored health communications for diverse communities. And I'm going to be using our Afghan health portfolio as an example, but these strategies could be used for any community that you're trying to reach. So we have a 5-step process for creating health communications materials to ensure that they're culturally relevant. It's listen, write, design, translate, and scale. And I'm going to go through all of these in more detail. So first, it's crucial to partner with community representatives on the content, the format, and the dissemination of health communications materials. You can do this with a focus group, a listening session, or by setting up a community advisory board. And we have resources on our website to help you do that. By listening to your community, you can learn not only about the topics that are of most interest or concern, but the format that'll work best. For example, if the community you're trying to reach is concerned about vaccines for children, but not vaccines for the elderly, you'll be able to create materials that respond to this. If your community relies on a more oral tradition, you can plan to direct your resources to audio and video materials rather than written materials. And if your community trusts information coming from their church or their children's school, you can plan to disseminate your materials using those strategies. For example, we learned that many Afghan people rely on that oral tradition. And even among people who read, a lot of them prefer not to receive information this way. So each of the fact sheets for our Afghan health portfolio has a QR code that links to a video as somebody reading the fact sheet aloud to them. This way we can meet the needs of people who prefer to read as well as those with oral traditions. So CDC and public health departments are great sources of reliable information, but the nature of their reach means they often have to write for very general audiences. But by using their work as a baseline, you can incorporate diverse perspectives into your materials. So our team reviews and analyzes guidelines and communications developed by the CDC or health departments, and we convert them into really simple, memorable language that's going to be as easy as possible to translate, while also framing the communication around the questions and concerns that we're hearing from our partners that are working in refugee, immigrant, and migrant communities. We also have a couple of physicians on our team that we ask to review the final product before it gets translated, just to make sure it continues to adhere to the most current guidelines. And I'll give you an example of this. One example of incorporating community perspectives is from our mental health and stress collection in our Afghan health portfolio. The first thing we do is acknowledge the context of Afghans' displacement while highlighting their community strengths. We say that they have great strength and bravery, but also acknowledge that migration is difficult and their feelings might be really complicated. We encourage them to talk to imams and mullahs if they need additional support and continue traditions from back home as they settle into life in the US. So in talking to our partners, we're able to incorporate these Afghan cultural traditions into some of our recommendations. Just for example, exercise has been shown to improve mental health, but rather than telling people to exercise, we suggest they do Atan dancing, which is the national dance of Afghanistan. Good bedtime routines promote better sleep, which helps with stress. So we suggest they drink herbal tea instead of kawa or chai in the evenings. And those are traditional teas from Afghanistan that contain caffeine that can disrupt sleep. One recommendation for mental health and stress is to spend time with loved ones. And we learned that chess was a common pastime in Afghanistan, so we suggest doing that. We might also suggest embroidery or cooking or picnics. There are also pastimes that can help with stress. And finally, we learned that kite flying was very popular in Afghanistan, but now it's forbidden by the Taliban. So for many Afghans, kite flying in the United States is not only a way to celebrate their tradition, but to honor the people that are remaining in their home country. Kite flying combines many of the recommendations for managing stress. It's spending time with loved ones and breathing exercises. It's exercise and routines. It also evokes positive memories from back home. And so this practice is prominently featured in our materials. I know you all work with vaccine equity, so I'll give you another example from our COVID-19 materials. This is from the Get the Facts campaign. Now, we heard that our partners that fertility was a top concern among people in RIM communities. And of course, this is also a concern for non-immigrant communities, but we wanted to make sure our materials centered the perspectives of the people that we're trying to reach. So we created a fact sheet. It's translated in more than 40 languages. It incorporates perspectives that are common in many immigrant communities. For example, that the vaccine will help you stay strong and healthy so that you can continue to provide for your family. It also notes that vaccinated parents protect their children, both by preventing children from being infected with COVID-19, but also because, for example, antibodies can be passed on to babies through breast milk. So now that you have all your content written, you need to work on your design. And so for that, I'll encourage you to set aside your own preferences for what is considered trendy design in Western cultures. And I'll give you an example. For our Afghan health portfolio, we took inspiration from the mosaics and tapestries that are popular in Afghanistan. We also looked at Afghan gemstones like turquoise and lapis lazuli. And we wondered what colors we should use for Afghan materials. Now, on the far left, you'll see our original branding, which is what this slide deck uses that I'm working from today. We did a very non-scientific survey of some of our key partners where they ranked possible color palettes based on what they thought would be best for our Afghan portfolio. And the middle one is the survey winner. However, one of the questions on the survey asks, are you Afghan or do you work closely with Afghans? And so when we filtered out these responses, the color palette on the far right was the winner. And this is the one that uses the Afghan flag colors of red, green, and black, and also includes the gemstone colors that I mentioned earlier. We previously used stock photos in our COVID-19 work, and the photo on the left was frequently used for our Afghan audiences. Now, our partners at the Afghan Health Initiative let us know that this photo is not reflective of Afghan people or their style of dress. So we asked them to select the stock photos for us, and the one in the middle was one of their selections. There's a lot of things to consider here, from the clothing people wear, how they style their hijab, accessories, and jewelry. We also learned that it's important to include children and families. So we actually took this one step further from having our partners choose our stock images for us. We actually held a photo shoot with Afghan families that we recruited through our relationship with the Afghan Health Initiative to create images that we use in our Afghan health portfolio. And on the far right, is an example of that. This is a real Afghan family that we recruited for this purpose. Now, regarding stock images, I know they're really hard to find. You want something that's royalty free that you're not going to have to pay for, especially if your budget is tight. So I'm going to give you some resources here. We've been told over and over again from our partners that we need to use photos rather than illustrations. And the most important thing that I want to stress about choosing photos representing refugees, immigrants, and migrants is to portray them as active in their families or community. I like to choose photos where they're doing something rather than just looking at the camera. They're shopping, they're reading, going to work, or doing other routine activities. And we use royalty-free stock photos featuring people with diverse bodies, skin tones, and cultural markers like clothing or food. The common websites that we look are Pexels, Mappy.co, and Pixabay. These are all free stock images, and you'll receive a link to these websites at the end of the presentation. So, we use photography when we can, but we also have fact sheets that use symbols or icons to help convey understanding. We have a health education collection, for example, on lead poisoning. And one of the points is that lead can be in some toys that children use. And so when I thought of a toy for a small child, I thought of a rocking horse, and I picked the symbol on the left. But during our cultural validation process, where we had community members look at our materials, I learned that rocking horses aren't typical in Afghanistan. So our partners helped us choose a rattle instead. Here's another example. We talk about bedtime routines. I picked the symbol on the left, but our cultural validators suggested that the one on the right would better convey the concept. So we put all of these things together, the photos, the symbols, the colors, the mosaics, and this is what we came up with. So if you ask someone who grew up in the United States what they think, they might look at the one on the right and say it looks like Christmas. It's green, it's red. But if you ask an Afghan person, they might say that the one on the right was created for them. Here are some of the topics that we cover in our Afghan health portfolio and the branding for each. These square tiles are really easy to make, even if you don't have design software. And if you don't have a marketing department, you don't have a graphic designer on staff, you don't have the budget for a contractor, there are free design tools that you can use. Pictochart and Canva are two tools to make printed materials like flyers or like an Instagram or social media asset. And then Animoto is the one in the middle. That is a web-based software that allows you to create videos, really cool videos. They have royalty-free music. They have templates that you can use. And so these are all drag and drop. You don't need any special expertise to use some of these resources. Now we're to our translation stage. Educational materials that are in a language and a format that communities understand is going to go a long way in supporting health literacy. So it's important to invest in a rigorous translation process. We contract with a company called Inco International to provide professional translation services using a three-step process. And this goes above and beyond industry standards. For most languages, the translation is completed by a professional translator, proofread by a second translator, and reviewed by a linguist. But once they do their thing, we then send the translation to a community reviewer. So we choose a person from the community who's fluent in English and their target language to flag any issues with the translation, like there any offensive language, sections that no longer make sense, places where the message has been significantly changed, or maybe if the language is too complex and not easy to understand. And we ask them to identify whether or not the translation, as well as the images we use, are culturally relevant. So once it goes through that community review process, we give it back to our translation company and they choose whether and how to incorporate the community reviewer's suggestions. We didn't always incorporate community review into our translations. Very early on in the pandemic, we had a fact sheet translated into Congolese Swahili that was not content validated. And I should note this translation did not go through the three-step process. It was a different translation company. But it turns out the word that they used for shot, like vaccine, was the word for gunshot. So not only is this an embarrassing language mix-up, it's extremely culturally insensitive to a group of people who may have fled violence in their home countries. And this is the kind of thing that can happen when you use Google Translate and with translations that are completed by humans, but they're maybe not rigorous enough or don't go through that validation. So even with a process as rigorous as this, there's always room for customization so that your materials can have local context. And the best people to do this are the community leaders themselves because they know their people best. We want anyone to be able to customize our materials, even if they don't have design software or a communications department. If you can use Microsoft PowerPoint or Word or Google Slides, you can use our templates. They're drag and drop. We have options in Google Slides and Canva. So you can remove our logo. That's totally fine to do. We don't need credit for these materials. You can add your own logo. You can add your website URL, or you can replace the photo to something that's more culturally affirming, because we want to offer organizations like yours the opportunity to do what is best for your local community. So to summarize, our materials are informed by community perspectives, written in simple language that's based on CDC guidance. They're designed in a way that honors linguistic and cultural communities, rigorously translated and validated for accuracy and cultural relevance, and they're customizable and scalable for communities. And I'm going to go through a demonstration now that kind of shows you how easy this is. This is our website, nrcrim.org. You could see respiratory illnesses, of course, is our most popular thing right now. You can see some of our other collections for our Afghan health portfolio here and how we've incorporated photography and the mosaics. But I'm going to do respiratory illnesses because I know you all are all about vaccine equity. And so we have a conversation guide on respiratory illnesses. If you're talking to somebody about this and you want to be able to explain what are respiratory illnesses, what are the symptoms, how do you know if it's COVID or the flu? These are some key messages that can help you with those conversations. We also have a fact sheet, so you can download this as a PDF. If you just want to open it up, Control P, print it, print some copies, hand it off at a resource fair, we have that just ready to go for you to do. We also have, you can customize it in Google Slides. And for this example, I'm going to click on Dari. So I'm just going to click this. There's a blue button in the corner called Use Template. And I'm just going to mark this as a demo really quick. Okay. So here you see, this is our logo. You can literally just drag and drop it and delete it. This is a QR code, like I said, that will link to a video of somebody reading the fact sheet in Dari. And if you maybe you don't like this picture and you want to use something else, you could just drag it like this. Go to our photo bank here with all these photos that we've used. I'm going to take this one. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it. And then you can just put it up in the corner and have that be the image that you want to use. And maybe you don't like this one, you can move that and then replace it, which whichever one speaks to you at the moment. And then you could just click File, Download as PDF. And then, you might be able to choose, you could choose whether to print these photo banks or not, but this is generally how you would do that. And then we also have this available in Canva, which I'm going to click on Pashto. And so you click Use Template for New Design. And this again has these images that you can remove. You can remove our logo. You can remove this image if you'd like. So this is doesn't have the photo bank in it, but you can still do some customizations if you're not able to access Google Slides. And then I'll show you, because I know that you have vaccine equity as your top sort of goal. These are our different COVID-19 campaigns, and I'll go over these in a little bit more detail in just a moment. So these are our COVID-19 vaccine communications. And so in our health communications portfolio, we work on curating existing translated materials. We create our own campaigns, and we develop tools like glossaries or checklists to help build the capacity of other organizations to do their own health communications work. We had three main COVID-19 vaccine campaigns: Get Vaccinated, Get the Facts, and Vaccination Is. The first one you'll see on the left is from our Get Vaccinated campaign. And this one's based on feedback that we got that indicates that people from many different backgrounds connect with the theme of protecting their communities. The middle is a sample from Get the Facts, which is based on CDC guidance, offering facts about COVID-19 vaccines in a simple and memorable way that counters common misconceptions. On the far right is an example from Vaccination Is. That is a campaign that we created using a human-centered design process that honors the priorities, the values, and the expertise of community leaders. Now, these campaigns include fact sheets, social media assets, posters, videos, and more. And then we just launched this, as I just showed you, the respiratory illnesses collection that addresses flu, the common cold, RSV, and COVID-19. And this includes a fact sheet and social media assets and a conversation guide. And then the Afghans, as I mentioned, have audio and video PSAs and a few extras in Dari and Pashto. That reminds me that I wanted to show you here, respiratory illnesses. So we have these, I showed you the fact sheet. We also have these social media assets that are translated and customizable. And then we have text message templates that have some key messages about how to stay safe and protect yourself from respiratory illnesses. These are our audio and video PSAs. And then we have the scripts here in case you want to recruit a trusted messenger to record their own video or audio message. And you'll know this is English, Dari, and Pashto for Afghans, but we also have this in more languages that has a different branding that is more generalizable to other communities. And so these are translated. We have about 20 or so high priority languages available in PDF, Google Slides, and Canva. So this is for example, this is Amharic. And so it just uses diversity of stock images with these translations. Another thing that we have that is very cool is we did 3 animated shorts, and they advocate for vaccines for children from the perspective of immigrant parents. And these are available in 14 languages. We won an award actually for this video series, so I'm very proud of it. And then another example of a video that has been very popular is a project we did with Pastor Prince Mundeke Mushunju. He's a refugee originally from the Democratic Republic of the Congo who now lives in the United States. And he did not believe that COVID-19 was real because of his religious beliefs. But then he and his family got very sick with COVID-19. And to use his words, he said they nearly died. He heard a lot a lot of misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines, but then he did his own research and his views shifted. So he now feels the responsibility to mobilize others to get their vaccines. And he's traveled the country and the world to advocate for COVID-19 vaccines from a religious perspective. And so we actually filmed a video of him telling his story during a trip to Uganda, where he preached about COVID-19 in refugee communities there. So that's all I had for you. This is how you can contact us, and you'll get a copy of these slides, which I'll just preview. You'll have links to all the videos, all the stock photo resources, everything else that I talked about today are going to be at the end of those slides. So yeah, that's all I had. I'll stop sharing my screen and see if anyone has questions.
All right. Thank you, Sarita, for the
Yeah.
insightful presentation and the helpful demonstration. So as you mentioned, we do have some time for questions and answers, but as we're waiting for those to come in, I'm just going to launch our quick satisfaction poll. You should see it pop up on your screen now, and we appreciate your participation in the poll. I don't know if I closed it. There we go. And I forgot to mention actually in the beginning that we hosted a similar event exactly 2 years ago in January 2022 with Sarita. And it's great to see how much NRC RIM has grown and adapted to focus on migrant needs over time. And this like Q&A session is gonna feel like deja vu.
I know, right? I'm excited. I had so much fun with you guys last time, so I'm excited.
Yes, I did see some questions come in. I know we have a couple in the Q&A, and I saw some things pop up in the chat, but I'll try to address those later. As we wait for a few more questions, I'll go ahead and just start with mine. It seems, well, based on the presentation, you all had a very robust process in developing the culturally validating materials. Were there any challenges that came up during or that might arise in the process, especially as others, go on their own journeys with organizations to, repeat similar steps?
The biggest challenge for me, honestly, and I usually say this, I should have said this during this presentation, I am not Afghan. I do not represent Afghan people. And so it was a lot of learning on my part about different cultural traditions. And even like the branding, like I told you, you have to kind of set aside your, like, what are Western design trends versus like, what is the community going to, what's going to resonate best with the community. And so it was a huge learning curve for me. And there are a few things that you can do. One is our community partnerships. Our partnerships with like International Rescue Committee and the Afghan Health Initiative have been instrumental to our success with these materials and our other initiatives that we're working on as a resource center. And then also having the cultural validation process and have it not just look at the accuracy of the translation is going to be another sort of layer of um, just another way to sort of inform your efforts. I also usually say this, so I've given different versions of this presentation a few different times now, and I actually have my speaking notes culturally validated because I didn't feel comfortable talking about like to say like, oh, that kite flying is a tradition or the gemstones being meaningful because I am not Afghan. And so I did have an Afghan person review the slides and the speaking notes so that I could speak more confidently about this. So I think just practicing that cultural humility, engaging with your partners, and then having cultural validators on hand to help you with your efforts.
Mhm. Great. Yeah, no, that's very important. And I see you kind of answered this question. I'll just go in chronological order from what I see in the Q&A. But kind of on the same note of practicing cultural humility, how do you go about with getting community input and feedback on resources that you might share? And are there any resources that, or advice, I guess, that you could share on how to do this?
I'm really lucky to work in an amazing team that has a wide network. And so when it comes to validating, for example, things for Afghan communities, we have both our partners as well as friends and colleagues that speak those languages or who are from Afghanistan that can help us out. If you don't have that, again, those community partnerships are going to be really crucial. One advice I would give is to not expect how do I say this? Not to expect free labor. It's good to compensate people for their expertise, especially cultural expertise. And so if you don't have money, like a lot of people don't have the budget to buy a gift card or to do something like that. And what I always recommend is thinking of ways that you could do an in-kind donation. So like, for example, you could help them write a resume, a cover letter, or you could create a flyer maybe for their church or their mosque for an event that's coming up. You know, you could do something for them that will communicate that you value their expertise and that it is really crucial to your success, and just to sort of express your appreciation for their efforts.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a great alternative to offer. I'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So someone's asking, what's the best practice for recovering after making a mistake? And they use the example of Swahili Gate here. So I guess kind of on the other end of the previous question, like what happens when, there's an error or a misunderstanding maybe in creating the culturally relevant materials.
So for Swahili Gate, we found out about it because somebody from the community contacted us and let us know. And what we did is just we immediately pulled it from our website. And when I say we pulled it from our website, I mean we didn't just delete it from our website. We contacted our IT department and asked them to scrub so that nobody with a link or a cached version would be able to access it. And then we obviously thanked the person who brought it to our attention, and we re-released the material. Um, we didn't do any kind of like broadcast apology or anything like that. I think that that would be a good idea depending on the community. For us, because we caught it so quickly and were able to remedy the situation, we did not. But I think the key learning there, if you were to issue an apology or not, is what are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? You know, it's one thing to make a mistake, but it's another thing to change your practices and policies based on community feedback. And so when that happened, that's when we started implementing cultural validation into every material that we create and publish and put out there, because, you know, it was such a gift to get that feedback from a community member, and we want that to influence the way that we do our work for every community from now on. So
Mhm.
that's going to show that you really took their feedback seriously.
Definitely. It's very important to maintain those relationships. And I know you talked a little bit earlier about working with community partners. Do you think you could maybe focus on or reiterate a little bit of best practices with identifying select community members or partners to work alongside when reviewing the translated materials? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
One of the things in my presentation, actually, that I will put in the chat is a resource for health departments on how to identify community partners.
Great.
Like I said, I have resources for many of the things that I talked about in the presentation. So I'm just going to put that in the chat here. And so, sorry, I can't do two things at once. Um, so for that, you know, for like community reviewers, for example, you definitely want somebody who is fluent in obviously the language of the community and English, who can really fully understand both versions of a document. And then as far as identifying community partners, you know, you could inquire with a lot of state health departments have like departments, or they may have liaisons with communities that can help you identify. You could start with, for example, a faith-based community. A local pastor or a mom probably has a good pulse on who is a trusted messenger in the community, or who you might be able to partner with in addition to like a church or a faith community. Looking to schools. Schools also have a lot of I worked in schools before public health, so they also have like a lot of really established partnerships that you might be able to share or tap into. But I guess the number one piece of advice I have for like managing these relationships is making sure that it's bi-directional. And so don't go into this relationship and say, what can you do for me? How can you validate my materials? How can you help me disseminate my resources? But also like, what can you do for them? So that same pastor might have ideas for like health topics that the community is concerned about, or maybe it's not health topics. Maybe they're going to tell you, my community would love to talk about respiratory illnesses, but rents are really high right now. And you might be able to connect that church to resources for rental assistance, even if that's not really in your area of expertise. But when you do that, when you're offering sort of, you're asking for their connections, but you're offering your connections in return so that it is a true partnership and not just you taking.
Yeah, I think that's great and great practices. And I would say, I know there's another question, and I'll just read it. And if you think you want to add anything, it's just very similar to what you just talked about. But someone asked, when working with BIPOC communities, not only should you include a message, but also a messenger. So what's your suggestion for when we cannot be from every community that we might be working with? I think you covered it a little bit in this last response. I don't know if you would add anything.
Not really, just so if I'm if I'm remembering correctly, the question is how do you um, provide a trusted messenger to BIPOC communities when you don't have people on staff that represent those communities? Is
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
okay? Yeah, so definitely going through those community partners, like I said, I think is going to be crucial. So I don't have a lot more to add, but just to reiterate,
Mhm.
investing in community partnerships and relationships with the community, making sure you're compensating people for their effort, whether it's with money or an in-kind donation, and then making sure the relationship is bi-directional.
Mhm. Yes. Thank you for reiterating some of those important steps. And this next question's a little more topical, or more specific on, I guess, the topics that NRCRA might focus on for some of the materials. So I'll go ahead and read it. It says, we're seeing a lot of individuals that have a humanitarian parole status. They're coming in for polio, MMR, and COVID-19 vaccines, and they're also eligible for ORR benefits. Do you have any information to provide to individuals on how to obtain Social Security and Medicaid if eligible? Because there seems to be a disconnect between these governmental agencies. You're on mute.
Yeah, I do. Let me just show you. Okay. So I'm going to show you this with a big asterisk caveat. So I'm first going to start with Afghans. Click on Afghans and then health education. We have Medicaid here. And so this has a conversation guide about Medicaid, as well as a customizable fact sheet about Medicaid, specifically for Afghans, who might qualify. Um, how to apply for Medicaid, how to find a clinic that accepts Medicaid, that sort of thing. And then I'll also show you there's also one for Ukrainians. If you go under Ukrainians and then Medicaid, that is going to have a very similar conversation guide, a very similar customizable fact sheet that you can hand out. That's in English, Russian, and Ukrainian. Unfortunately, we've learned that if you are a parolee who arrived on or after October 1st, 2023, you no longer qualify for ORR or federal mainstream benefits. And this is mostly affecting Ukrainians right now, like much more than Afghans, just based on their immigration status. And so if you want to read about this, we have the letter from ORR. ORR is the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We have a letter here that kind of explains who is eligible and who's not. And then we also have resources, English, Russian, and Ukrainian for alternatives, health insurance alternatives. And we did not create this. I have to give credit to Nova Ukraine. This is an amazing resource. They have video explainers. They have a whole spreadsheet of different resources by state that you might be able to access if you no longer qualify for Medicaid. So this is what we have right now, but it's, like I said, it's complicated based on the immigration status that you have and when you arrived. So that's what we have so far. I hope I answered that question. I
Yes,
don't
I
have a
think
lot of
that was great.
information on like SNAP and WIC and some of those other services. It's mostly Medicaid that I know about.
Mhm. Yeah, no, thank you for pointing out where to find some of those resources on the
Mhm.
website. Um, this next question points to the necessity of content and cultural review for materials, but they're asking how long can it take for each resource to get completed and published, because a lot of
Mm.
the materials that we're dealing with are time sensitive.
Yes. So from when we were doing our COVID say, our COVID work. From that time, we decided we're going to make a fact sheet about, say, fertility or booster shots or whatever it might be. And from the time we decide to the time that we publish our first languages, which are usually common languages like Spanish, French, Arabic, that could be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks because we do the writing, we do the medical review, we do the translation, and then the translation review, and it adds a lot of time. And so there's a few things that we've done to help with that. One is that we pair our fact sheets with a conversation guide. And so while you're waiting for the fact sheet to be available in more languages, we have conversations guide there for those trusted messengers so that they can guide the conversations with others. And our conversation guides incorporate those immigrant and refugee perspectives while we're working on our translations. And I showed you one about Medicaid. I showed you one about respiratory illnesses. That's kind of our stopgap tool while we're working on things. Another example of a way that we dealt with this during COVID, and I'm going to show you our Get the Facts campaign here. We worked with something that we called the dots. And let's see, here's an example, COVID-19 variants. So by the time we published this in all of our languages, it said learn about Delta. By the time we published it in all of our languages, people weren't concerned about Delta anymore. They were concerned about Omicron. And so we made these dots so that literally we can cut off the corner. You could put a sticker over it. You can do whatever you need to do. If you've already printed 2,000 of these, you could still use them without having to go through the retranslation process. And then if another variant, you have something like Lambda that becomes a concern, you can we could swap that out overnight and just put a different dot that says Lambda on it. I don't know if there's a variant called Lambda, I just made that up. But we did it similar for vaccines for children and youth. And so at first it said 16 plus, and then it said 12 plus, and then it said 5 plus, and now it says babies. And what we did is we made these dots and we pre-translated them into all of our languages. And so as soon as the CDC said, yes, 12-year-olds can get the vaccine, we overnight were able to update all of these fact sheets without having to go through a 6 or 8 week long cultural validation process of like retranslating everything. The only part on this fact sheet where it mentions the age is on this dot. So we did that for vaccines for children and youth. We did that for boosters. We did that for, this says now available ages 5 plus. Those are the sorts of things that we will do to kind of help keep things up to date when things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And things change all the time, so it's always great to have something that's easily customizable. This next question is about the potential for updating some of NRC RIM's materials. So this says, this is an excellent presentation. I was learning a vaccine and wellbeing resources would be updated on the NRC RIM website for Ramadan in 2024. I noticed there was a checklist for years in the past, and this would be a wonderful resource to use again for our communities this year.
That is really good feedback. Now is about the time that we start talking about Ramadan, so I'll bring that back to our team. I can't give you a timeline for whether we're gonna update those or not. Another thing we did last year was for Nowruz, which is Persian New Year, which is celebrated by lots of Afghan communities as well. It's a lot of people in Central Asia celebrate it. So we had similar resources for Nowruz, but yes, I'd definitely take that feedback back to the team. I'm glad that those resources were useful to you in the past.
Thank you. And next, going back kind of to the cultural validation process, are there any skills or requirements that you look for in a cultural validator specifically?
Only that they're multilingual and they're very, of course, like embedded in the community. That's really all that we look for. Obviously, if it's a printed material, they should be literate in both languages. But I mean, it's also good for them to have some level of technical expertise, be able to use email or depending on the resource, making comments like in the Adobe Acrobat but honestly, we take our feedback in lots of different ways. So not everyone knows how to use the comment feature in Acrobat. And so if you just want to write it out in the body of an email, I had some people send me feedback on WhatsApp if that's what you got to do for me to get the reason, like it's really up to me to figure out how to get their feedback and turn it into a product. It's not up to them to figure that out. And that's part of that cultural humility. If they want to send me feedback on WhatsApp, by all means, like I'll take it.
Yes, you gotta meet them halfway. Um, this next question specific is specific to I guess giving feedback to other like departments or partners that are using materials. So this asks, what suggestions do you have for gently suggesting to departments or partners that their materials might not be accessible to the target community?
Um, I'm not sure what that means by accessible, if you mean like ADA compliant or the language. I mean, that's okay. I can still kind of speak to it. But I think I oh gosh, that's a hard question. I think having patience and trying to explain things like, for example, if they're using Google Translate to do their translations and being able to say, hey, that's not a best practice, you can point to some evidence. There's actually been like peer-reviewed articles for how accurate AI is at translating. The answer is not accurate enough. You could point to some resources like NRC RIM in our, you'll get a link to this, but we have a toolkit for written translation. We have a toolkit for content validation. We have some other checklists and resources that you could kind of point them to and say, this is a best practice. I saw this webinar, but I think you could demonstrate how and why the materials aren't accessible. If you've gotten specific community feedback, that might go further than having the feedback just be from you. So to say like, I have somebody at my church, I gave her this material and she said that she didn't understand it. Do you think we could try a more simple language? Something like that, where it's not just it's not just your suggestion, it's responding to community feedback. I think is also a strategy that could work. I'm sorry, I feel like I should have a better answer to that, but it's tough. It's tricky. Um, yeah.
I think that's great. Um, you got to start somewhere, and
I
I feel
know,
like
right? I
giving
know.
feedback is always there's multiple ways you can go about it. I think those are all the public questions that we have in the Q&A. There's one asking, how did you handle the date change? And I think that might be referring to the question about when you showed us the dots
Oh,
on the website. I think I think it's just a matter of adding the dots to make it easier to update just a little corner instead of updating
yeah.
a whole fact
We
sheet.
also have the publication date. It's very small in like the corner of our materials. And so if you're reading something and you say, this isn't quite right, you could say, oh, this was last updated in September and the guidelines have changed, whatever it may be. We don't have the capacity to update our COVID-19 materials right now unless it's something that is it's something that's like harmful, something drastically changed, we would, but for little things like when to wear a mask, things like that. We don't generally update small details like that.
Mhm. Yes.
Also,
Well,
I'm sorry, I just thought of another thing about gently suggesting. I don't usually suggest you walk in with like the threat of legal action necessarily, but whether it's ADA compliance or language access, those are both guaranteed by the Civil Rights Act. And so like I said, I wouldn't lead with that. But if you need to take action to become compliant with federal law, that can persuade people who will not otherwise be persuaded sometimes. Maybe like conversation 3, you can bring that up. Yeah.
yeah, I think no, that's good to mention, and I think you clarified a little bit more on this question talking about accessibility. The There was a clarifying point that when talking about accessibility, they were talking about deaf or hard of hearing populations.
Oh,
Um, but I don't know if you have any advice on that.
yeah, I do. So we have all of our videos have captions that are actually they're not like auto-generated by YouTube. So we always include captions, including for our translations. And we do that for the deaf and hard of hearing community, but we also do that because I'm gonna I'm not sure of the exact number, but a large majority, something like 80% of people watch Facebook and Instagram videos with the sound off. So that's why when we're posting stuff to social media, we want to make sure that we have the subtitle files so that they can be used, um, by anyone, no matter how they use social media. But our materials for folks who are visually impaired or blind, our materials are not compliant, but they can, if you contact us, we can give you a compliant version of whatever you need.
Great, thank you for that. I think those might be all the questions for today. I'll maybe we can move on to the announcements, and then if any questions come up, I know we still have about 5 minutes left. So if there are any last minute questions, I'm happy to address them later. But Jenny, when you have the chance, do you think you can pull up the PowerPoint slides again, please? And we just have two upcoming events that will pop up on the screen soon, and we'll also be sending the registration links in the chat. But we have an event coming up the event is on February 20th, but this is for the writing workshop, which is the first bullet on the slide. It is closed to learning community members only. And because there are limited spaces, there is also going to be an application requirement. And so even though the event is on February 20th, the applications are actually due this week on January 24th. I believe that's Wednesday. And the link to the application for that will be in the chat. And we also have our quarterly paid member orientation coming up on February 8th. That'll be from 1 to 1:30. And the registration link for that will also be in the chat. And I can go ahead and send them real quick. All right. So they should be in the chat. I don't see any new questions coming in. So I think we might be able to end a few minutes early. I did see a lot of questions in the chat asking about when these materials will be shared or how. We will make them available on the Learning Community website and over the next few days, sometime this week for sure. And we always send them out through the listserv, the CDC Adult Vax listserv. If you aren't able to get the materials or you don't receive them, you can always send us an email at our manager's inbox. I can go ahead and send that in the chat as well. vaxequitylearning@urban.org. And seeing as there are no questions, I think we can just go ahead and close. So that's all from us. Thank you again, Sarita, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you all for joining today. And we hope to see you all at an upcoming Learning Community session.
Yeah, take care.